I've froze. Zoom did not freeze. Zoom went all the way through. So there were people that wanted to see the show on Facebook Live, and so I realized the fair thing for me to do is to do the show again here on Facebook Live. Here it is, my show, Walking While Black in Moscow. Yay! All right. So I am at the airport and I am at the customs desk, and I'm not going to lie, I was kind of nervous. I handed the customs clerk my passport. She opens it up, she looks at the picture, then she looks at me. Then she looks at the picture again, then she looks at me. Now, as I looked at the blonde, icy looking customs clerk, I remembered all of the warnings that I was given by my friends. Now, the country that I was coming to was Russia. And not gonna lie, I was a little nervous. Every time someone would say something, they would say things like, "Les, you're going to Russia? Did you know that Russians hate Black people?" And if they weren't saying that, they were saying, "Les, you're going to Russia? Do you know Russians despise gay people?" And if they weren't saying the Black thing or the gay thing, they would just look at me and say, "Les, you're going to Russia? Are you fucking crazy?" Now, my thought process was this: hey, you know what? Russia's dangerous? That's fabulous. I can go to Russia, some crazy shit will happen, and I could write a show about it. But now I'm standing here waiting to get into the country that I was warned not to come to, and I started to think to myself, maybe everybody was right. Now, meanwhile, my passport is being inspected within an inch of its life. She opens up the passport, she looks at the picture, then she looks at me. Then she looks at the picture again, then she looks at me. Then she turns the passport to the back page where my Russian visa is, and she starts studying that visa. And while she's looking at that visa, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? She better take this visa. I paid $400 for that goddamn thing. She then turns the passport back to the front, and she once again looks at the picture, then she looks at me. She looks very confused, right? So she called over one of her coworkers, blonde, icy looking. And as the coworker walks over, I think to myself, wow, I guess there's a theme to the hiring process in this place. So they start talking, right? Her and the coworker. And as they're talking, they keep on saying the word American, American, and they said that over and over again. So I had an idea. I looked around for my boyfriend, John, and he was nowhere in sight. Okay. John and I haven't been together that long, and this is actually our first trip together. Now, just so you know, John is British, but he also looks like he's Russian. So he could make it through, he made it through customs lickety split. Like I said, we haven't been together that long. Now, let's just say last year was, I think, the crappiest year of my life. Crappy. I ended a 12-year relationship. I lost my job. I lost my place to live. I lost all my money. You know how it is like when you're watching one of those Hallmark movies or Lifetime where the woman loses everything? I was that woman. So we haven't been together all that long, but John is coming here on for business here in Russia, and he invited me to come with him. At first, I was hesitant, because with that crappy year that I had last year, I felt like I had lost myself a little bit. You know, that feeling. But this was the nicest thing that someone has done for me in a long time. A trip to Russia. And this was the win I needed. So I don't know how this is going to go, but fingers crossed. So I look back at the women, and the women are still talking. The coworker shrugs her shoulders and she walks away. And the blonde customs officer comes back and she stands at the window and she's looking at me, not knowing what to do. And I'm looking at her, not knowing what to do. We were at an impasse. And as we stand there staring at each other, I think to myself, why do I always get myself into these situations? And then I remember why. Now, they say that things that happen to you as a child leave an imprint on your brain and affect everything that you do as an adult. So my very first memory was walking up a flight of stairs. I remember it was cold. I was wearing a coat. My mom is in front of me. My dad and my sister are behind him. And the reason why we were walking up those stairs was because we were getting on an airplane. You see, we were moving from our home in London, England, to our brand new home in San Antonio, Texas. Now, I couldn't read the side of the plane because I was little, but my mother said the plane said Pan Am. So we get to the top of the stairs and we walk into the airplane and we walk through this big plume of smoke because this was back when you could actually smoke on an airplane. We find our seats. I buckle up. Soon we are in the air. And once we are in the air, this is when things really got fun. The stewardess brings me a hot meal of mashed potatoes and gravy and chicken because this was actually back when they served you real meals on a plane. I got a coloring book from the stewardess. I watched a movie. I fell asleep. And when I woke up, we were landing in our brand new home, San Antonio. And as I walked down the stairs on that tarmac, I thought to myself, wow, this is fun. I want to do this again. So I'm looking at the customs agent, and she is standing there looking at me, not knowing what to do. And I am standing there looking at her, not knowing what to do. She opens up my passport. She looks at the picture. Then she looks at me. Then she looks around. She lets out this great big sigh. Oh! And she opens up the turnstile and lets me into the country of Russia. Now, I grabbed my passport and I wanted to run, but then I realized, oh no, a black man running through an airport in Russia, especially since he has dreadlocks, wouldn't alert any suspicion at all, would he? So I kept on walking and I walked as fast as I could. And next thing I knew, I turned a corner and I bumped into John. Oh, Les, I see you made it. And I was like, John, where have you been? I texted you several times. I didn't think that they were going to let me into the country. And he says, oh, well, I walked away because I didn't want them to get suspicious. And everything's great. You're here now. Everything was not great. So we go to the baggage claim and we get our baggages and we hop into a cab and we start heading towards the city of Moscow. And I am still pissed. I'm pissed. I'm fuming. And because of this, everything was just gray and drab and ugly and awful looking. And I thought to myself, how the hell am I going to survive 2 weeks in this place? So we continue to drive until we get to our hotel room. And we walk. I mean, the hotel itself. So we get out of the car, and we walk into the hotel. And when we're at the hotel at the front desk, we're greeted by this very stern front desk clerk. Now, this woman was as cranky as she was beautiful, which means this woman was absolutely stunning. So John is talking to her in Russian because he speaks fluent Russian, but she just answered him in English. She was not having him at all. And when she walked into the back room to get our keys, John looks at me and says, "Well, I guess someone wants to practice their English lessons today." So we get our keys and we go to our room and we put our bags down, and I sit at the edge of the bed and I am pissed. Now, when I get angry, I get quiet. And so I sat on the side of the bed and I just fumed. John then says, "Would you like to go for a walk?" And I say, "I might as well. I'm stuck here for 2 weeks." So we go outside of the hotel. When we walk outside of the hotel, it was not what I was expecting at all. It was a lovely Indian summer evening. There were kids riding around on their bikes, and I looked at the color on the buildings, and there were just these bright technicolors. There were oranges and greens and blues and purples. And the more I looked at this technicolor, the more my anger started to float away. I felt like I was walking through a cartoon. We start walking down the street. And as we walk down the street, I'm looking around and I'm seeing lovers holding hands, people buying ice cream. We kept on walking. We walked over the Moscow River. And as I turned around and looked in the background, I saw building after building after building after building after building. We continued to walk past the tomb of the unknown soldier. And before I know it, we are looking at St. Basil's Cathedral. And I started to get a little lightheaded. Now, the reason why I started getting a little lightheaded was because this was weird. And the reason why this was weird was because 2 months earlier, I went to a vision board workshop. And for some unknown reason, I put a picture of St. Basil's Cathedral on my vision board. And here we are 2 months later, and I'm looking at St. Basil's Cathedral. So you know what that means. That vision board shit really works. So we walk into Red Square, and this place is an absolute scene. All right. There are wall-to-wall people everywhere. There's music blaring from the loudspeaker. It was Snoop Dogg, by the way. We looked around, and okay, so on one side was this building that looked like an Aztec pyramid, Lenin's tomb. In front of us was St. Basil's Cathedral. And then on the other side was this big, menacing looking building called the Goom. So John motions me to follow him, and I follow him into the Goom, and we go through these revolving doors, and this place is absolutely fabulous. There are chandeliers coming from the sky. There are marble floors. It's absolutely fabulous. And John looks at me and says, "This is the mall." And I'm like, "The mall? Like the mall, like the Sherman Oaks Galleria mall? I bet there's no hot dog on a stick in this place." Then John says, Les, Russians can be over the top sometimes. And this place was over the top. So we walked through this place and we walked past windows with mannequins wearing fur coats. We, at one point, walked by this line of people that I swear was like 50 people deep. And they're waiting for something. And when I asked John what they're waiting for, he says, watermelon. Russians love watermelon. And I go and I look at the fountain, and yes, indeed, they were waiting for watermelon. And in this fountain, there literally was like 100 watermelons inside. Crazy. So we decide that we're going to go get something to eat. And so we go up to the top of this place and we have this authentic Russian meal, black bread, pancakes. We even had this soup with caviar on the bottom. After I ate my meal, I felt my jet lag kicking in. And so we decided to call it a night because my adventure was set to begin tomorrow. So ever since I was a little kid, I was always told that I was part Native American. So the story was my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side was from the Choctaw tribe in Oklahoma. So my great-great-grandmother married my great-great-grandfather, and they moved from Oklahoma to Texas. Now, I was told this my entire life, right? So one day I decided to take an ancestry DNA test, one of those ancestry DNA kits. And when I got my results back, the results were very interesting. So it starts off, of course, with the African countries like, Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, Togo. And then it took a turn. Scotland, Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Russia? Yeah, Russia. So you know what that means? I'm Russian. And that means these are my people. Oh, and guess what? Guess how much Native American DNA I had? Guess. 0. So the next day was my first day on my adventure. Now, John had business meetings all day, and so he asked me what I wanted to do. And basically, I gave him a list of what I wanted to do. And after I gave him the list, he writes out the list for me. But when he hands me the list, I look and I say, John, you wrote this in Cyrillic. So I give him the list back, and he writes down the English spellings of it. And then he hands it back to me. And he says, Les, I've been thinking. Russia can be a little intimidating sometimes. And I'm worried about letting you go alone. So why don't you come with me to work? And then when I get some breaks and stuff, I can take you sightseeing. But this was not my first time at radio. I've traveled before. So I send John on his merry way, and I then go on my first adventure, which was to Lenin's tomb. So I go down to the front lobby, and I ask the very stern hotel clerk, excuse me, can you tell me how to get to the metro? And she just kind of scowls and she points. So I walk outside of the hotel and I start walking towards the metro. And as I'm walking towards the metro, I start looking at this architecture and taking in the scenery. And as I'm walking, I walk by this woman, and she's this older woman, and she's just looking at me, and she's scowling. And I remembered, oh, yeah, that's right. Russians hate Black people, or so I was told. So I walk by her as I feel her eyes bore holes in the back of my head. So I continue to walk, and all of a sudden I see this church. And the door was open, and so I decided that I could go in and sneak a peek. This church was like nothing I had ever seen before. There were no seats or benches of any kind. There were lights, or there were candles all around the room, but no lights. And there was a group of women wearing very colorful headscarves who went from station after station lighting them and saying prayers. And I decided, you know what? This is a good time for me to get a prayer of my own. So I go and I light a candle and I say the following prayer. All right, God, let's do this. Let's go out there. Let's have some fun. Amen. And I left the church and headed towards the metro. So I'm walking into the metro, and there's this guy sitting out in front of the metro. And as I walk towards the door, he looks at me and he takes out his camera and he takes my picture. Where's that? Ah, there it is. He takes my picture. And I thought that was weird, right? So I walk into the metro station, and there are these two women sitting behind a desk. And there was a sign in front of the ticket counter that says, yes, English spoken here. So I walk up to the ticket counter and I ask the women, excuse me, do you speak English? The woman on the left says, English? And she looks to her friend, English? No English. And so I whip out my list, right? And I look for where I was headed, and I say Krasny Kravat. Krasny Kravat. Now I guess I mispronounced the word because the women both started looking at me funny. And I was later told that my mispronunciation of that word actually caused me to ask those women if they wanted to go to bed with me. Sorry. But that was okay. That was okay. I had my list, right? So one of the women looks at me and she does this. She points at me and then she points to these escalators. And then she does this. Which I took to mean take the escalator down 2 floors. When you get to the second floor, go to the left, hop on the train, go 4 stops, you're there. So I took the escalator down 2 flights, and I hopped on the first train that came along. And as I'm sitting there on the metro, there are these 2 girls who are sitting in front of me, and they're looking at me and they're giggling. And then we get to the first stop, and as they get up to leave, one of the girls brings out her cell phone and she snaps my picture. Okay, that's 2 people in an hour. That's weird. So the metro goes 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops, 4 stops. And when we get to the 4th stop, I look at the name on my paper and it's not matched the name on the wall. I think I made a mistake. So I hopped out and I went to the metro going to the other side. And I hopped on that 8 stops later. I'm there. I made it. Woo! So I hop out of the metro and I walk up the stairs. And when I get out of the metro, I realize I'm a little turned around because St. Basil's Cathedral is opposite of where it was last night. And so I realized I came out on the other side of Red Square. Now, this side of Red Square was a lot more festive than last night's Red Square. This side of Red Square reminded me a lot of Hollywood Boulevard back in Los Angeles. So if you ever come to Los Angeles and you ever go to Hollywood Boulevard, you will see that it is a scene. So I start walking towards Red Square, and I walk by a Starbucks, and I think, oh wow, they're everywhere. Then I walk by a Burger King, and I'm like, oh wow, they're everywhere. And then I walk by a McDonald's, and I'm like, oh wow, they're everywhere. And then I walk by a KFC, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I'm like, okay, that's just disgusting. Come on. So when I got to the entrance of Red Square, they had like one of those tide pools, where you could simulate surfing. And the juxtaposition of the guy surfing with the Kremlin in the background was hilarious. So when you go to Hollywood Boulevard, you will find that there's a group of out-of-work actors who dress like superheroes. The reason why they dress like superheroes is because they want you to take pictures with them for tips. There's Superman, there's Batman, there's Wonder Woman, there's even Marilyn Monroe. But when you get close to them, you realize they're a little sad and broken down looking. So here at Red Square, they had their versions of superheroes too. They had Stalin, they had Mao Zedong, they even had Maria Antoinette. And the difference is, these people were hot. So I walk into Red Square, and as I walk into Red Square, I see this couple, and they're taking pictures. There's this woman in a large wedding dress, and there's this guy dipping her and kissing her. And there was a crowd around them, and I thought it was a modeling shoot. So I walk over, and I'm looking at the shoot, and all of a sudden I see someone trying to get my attention, and it looked like someone was waving at me. So I look over, and I see these two guys. And they're waving at me, and I wave back, and they start walking towards me, and I'm like, oh, well, you know what? I guess they can't do anything. I'm in a crowd. So they walk over, and one of the guys says, American? And I say, yes, American. And he says, Russia. And he points to his friend and he says, Uzbekistan. New York? No. Chicago? No. I'm from Hollywood. And they both start jumping up and down going, Hollywood! Then the guy says, picture. And he whips out his cell phone. Now, I'm thinking that he wants me to take a picture of him and his buddy. But when I go to grab the cell phone, he says, no, picture. He wanted a picture of me. Okay, so I took a picture of them I took a picture with them with their camera. And then I took a selfie with them on my camera. And they ran off along their merry way. And I went to get in the line to go to Lenin's tomb. So Vladimir Lenin was a former Soviet Union. What did I say? Former Soviet? Not a former Soviet Union. He was a former leader in the Soviet Union. So Vladimir Lenin was a former leader in the Soviet Union, and he passed away. And when he passed away, they created a mausoleum, and literally, he is there on display. He's been there on display since 1924. So it is said that all good Russians go and pay their respects to Comrade Lenin. And since I am a good Russian, I decided that I was going to go and do my due diligence. So I'm waiting in line to get into Lenin's tomb. And as I'm waiting in line, I get a text from John. Are you okay? And I text him, not only am I okay, I'm making new friends. And I send him a picture of my selfie with my two new buddies. So I go to Lenin's tomb, and he was there. Yep, his body was there. That had been there since 1924. And he looked like he had been there since 1924. And that was it. I did it. It's done. I never have to do it again. So that night, John and I were going out to dinner with, we were going over to a friend's house for dinner. And not only was this an old friend of his, this was someone who he used to date. And so I was very curious. So we hop in this taxi, and the taxi driver starts driving. And the taxi driver's driving like a bat out of hell. He's driving, he's swerving through the streets of Moscow. And as he's driving and swerving through the streets of Moscow, he and John are talking. But since I don't speak Russian and the guy didn't speak English, John was doing our translating. He wants to know if you're an athlete. He wants to know if you're a rapper. He wants to know how you like the vodka here in Russia. Tell him I don't drink. He says he hopes you're not offended because he's drunk right now. But we made it in one piece. So the guy that John used to date, he worked for the embassy. And because of this, they lived on this compound. And the security on this compound was so tight that you actually needed a passport to get in. So we show our passports and we get in, and we are led to this fabulous Art Nouveau 20s apartment, where we meet George and his boyfriend Alan and their very fun, fabulous friend named Leanne. Now, Leanne reminded me a lot of Jerry Hall because she was blonde, but she had this Texas twang with a little Londoner thrown in. So George and I hit it off immediately. We are having fun. We're laughing, we're talking, we're having a great time. And as we're talking, I realize, wait a minute. I am sitting here talking to two gay men who live here in Russia. So I turned to them and I asked them, okay, you guys, what's like being gay here? Seriously, do you fear for your safety? Do you worry about getting beat up? What's it like? So the answer I got back was, well, it's okay. It's fine to be gay as long as you don't tell anybody. If you don't tell anybody you're gay, then, you can live a very great life. Now, I have diplomatic immunity and I live in this compound, so I don't have to worry. But I think if I moved up on the economy, I'd be okay. Now, hearing this guy say this broke my heart. And it's not because of what he said, it was the way he said it. Now, I've lived in California most of my adult life, and I have been out most of my adult life, and I'm even out in my career. I'm very out. But this guy said that, you know, it's okay as long as you don't tell anybody. Like it was just normal. And I realized how good I have it back home. And I realized I need to stop taking that for granted. So the next day, I was off on another adventure. I was headed to Gorky Park. Why Gorky Park? Because I saw the movie in high school. So I walked downstairs and I asked the very stern front desk clerk, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Gorky Park?" And she just scowls and points, and I start walking to Gorky Park. Now, since I've been here in Russia, there was a weird phenomenon that started to happen. Every time someone would walk by me, especially another man, he would look at me and say, "Hello, bro." At first, I thought maybe the guy had watched like one of those blaxploitation movies or something, but then it kept on happening. "Hello, bro. Hello, bro." And of course, I said hi back. So I'm walking up the street and I'm walking towards Forky Park. And as I get close, there's these big rain clouds in the sky. And the closer I get to Gorky Park, the darker the cloud gets. Until I'm about ready to enter into the park, and it just starts raining and thundering and lightning. And I realize I need to get the hell out of there. And so I see a metro station. So I go to the metro. And I realized that I needed to have a change of plans. And so I decided that I was going to go back to Red Square and go to the Armory because that is where all of the crown jewels are held in Russia. So I walk up to the ticket counter, and there's a big sign on the ticket counter that says, "Yes, English spoken here." But when I asked the guy, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" He looks and says, "English? No English." But that's okay because I had my list. So I walk over to the map and I look on the map and I figure out that it's actually not that bad. Like all I need to do is go 2 stops, hop off, switch trains, go one more stop, I'm there. Easy. So I hop on the first train and I go 2 trains. And when I get to the second stop, I walk off the train and I realize I'm screwed. You see, this was the transfer point for 5 different lines. And remember, I can't speak or read Russian. I'm screwed. So I'm looking at the map and I'm trying to figure everything out. And then this guy walks up to me, and I guess I was looking very confused because he looks at me and he asks me something which I didn't understand. And so and I say to him, "Kremlin." And he looks and says, "Kremlin." And he motions me to follow him. And so I follow him. Now, before you guys all start giving me a lecture about how stupid it was to follow a strange guy in a subway station in the middle of Moscow, I had a plan. Now, I had sized this guy up, and we were about the same height and weight, so I knew I could take him if I had to. So we go, right? And I follow him, and he takes me to this track, and the train comes, And we hop on the train and we go to the next stop. And I look at my paper, and on the paper, the writing on the paper matched the writing on the wall. We made it. So we get out of the metro and we go to the stairs, and the guy points to the exit and says, Kremlin. And then he shakes my hand and he walks away and he goes to the other side of the track and hops on the train going the other way. Now, I was warned that in Russia, they hated Black people. And I was ready for it. But the fact that this guy, who just happened to be a different color than I was, made sure that me, a complete stranger of a different color, got to my destination safely. And I got to tell you, that was the nicest thing that anybody's done for me in a very long time. And I realized maybe I have some prejudices that I need to look at too. So I walk out of the metro station and the rain is over and the sun is shining, and I go to get in the line to go to the armory. Now, like I said, the armory is where all the jewels in Russia are held. And so I get there, and this woman is behind a ticket counter, and she's looking kind of busy. And there's a woman waiting for her. And so I stand behind the woman waiting, and then someone else stands behind me, and someone else stands behind them, and someone else stands behind them, and someone else stands behind them. And pretty soon we have this really huge long line. So we're waiting, and all of a sudden I look over, and the woman in front of me is yelling at the woman behind the ticket counter in Russian. And she turns to me and says, "This bitch isn't even open today. And she's standing here watching us line up like idiots, and she's getting off on it." So then the woman behind the ticket counter looks at all of us. She smiles. She holds up a magazine, which is what she was really doing behind that desk, and she says, "Vacation," and shuts the curtains down in front of the desk. So later, I brought this up to John, and John says, "Oh, yeah, that's what it's like here in Russia. You know, businesses decide to close when they feel like it, and they don't give a shit whether you like it or not." I thought about it for a second, and I realized I act like that sometimes. I guess I'm more Russian than I thought. So since I had this free time, I decided to go to the Pushkin Museum, where I went and saw like this fabulous art, painters, Monet, Manet, just amazing art. And as I'm walking through the museum, I look over and I see something that I have not seen in weeks. A Black person. We look at each other. She looks at me. I look at her. And I'm like, "Oh my God." And we go running towards each other and we give each other a great big hug. And I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "What are you doing here?" And we're talking like we're like these old friends, right? And we're talking and we're laughing. And she looks at me and says, "Can I ask you a weird question? Are people taking your picture?" So after that, after the Pushkin Museum, I went back to the hotel to get ready because I was meeting John and his friend Nikolai for dinner that night. Now, the original plan was John was going to go to a business meeting, but the business meeting was next door to the restaurant. He was going to come back from the business meeting, pick me up, and we were going to go all the way back to the other side of town. Now, I say to John, "Okay, that's stupid. Why don't I just meet you there? I'll take the metro." Now, I know this is going to sound really hokey, and I know it's going to sound kind of weird, but learning how to navigate this metro made me feel like myself again. I mean, I didn't speak the language, I couldn't read, it was kind of dangerous, but learning how to navigate this metro made me feel like myself again. That self that I lost in that horrible year last year. And you know what? It was pretty damn good to be back. And I realized things are going to get better from here. So I hop on the metro and I take the metro across town. And as I walk out of the metro, I see John standing there with his friend Nikolai. And I could tell that John was very impressed that I made it across town by myself. So we go to this Russian restaurant, and this Russian restaurant is like really cool. And the funny thing about it is there are these two guys with a live band crooning the audience as we ate our dinner. And as we're eating our dinner, John and Nikolai are catching up because they've been friends for like 20 years. And as they're catching up, I realize, wait a minute, I'm talking to another gay man who lives in Russia. And so I asked Nikolai, okay, Nikolai, what's it like being gay here in Russia? Are you afraid for your safety? Do you worry about getting beat up? What's it like? And the answer that I got was the same answer that I got before. Oh, it's okay to be gay as long as you don't tell anybody. If nobody knows you're gay, you're fine. And once again, it broke my heart because these guys basically had to stay in the closet to lead a good life. And once again, I realized how good I had it back home. And I realized I need to appreciate it more. So after dinner, Nikolai tells us that he's going to take us to a Russian gay bar. And I'm like, yes. So we walk up to this building, and this building is like this empty building, like no lights, no music, no nothing. We walk into the building, and it's really dark inside too. No lights, no music, no nothing. And the only thing that's lit is there's this red light next to the stairs, and there's a velvet rope. And when you walked up, the guy asked you, do you know what kind of bar this is? Now, the reason why they ask you that is because that's how they vet you before they let you in. And if you don't know what kind of bar this is, if you don't know that it's a gay bar, you don't get in. So we start walking up the stairs. We walk up 1 flight, 2 flights, 3 flights, 4 flights, 5 flights of stairs, and it is creepy. No lights, no music, no nothing. We get to the 5th floor, and a door opens up, and music comes blaring out. And I realize that I am at my first Russian speakeasy. Now, there's literally like 100 people there, and everybody's laughing and talking and having fun. And then when I found out that the cops could bust this place at any second, it made it even more exciting. So we're laughing and we're talking and we're having a great time. And I look at my watch and I realize it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And so John and I tell Nikolai that we're going to catch a cab home. And Nikolai's like, no. As a gay man, you should never take a cab here. The cab driver will not take you home. Either he'll take you somewhere else, they'll beat you up, and the police will not help you because you're gay. And once again, it broke my heart because, you can't even take something like a cab without worrying about your safety and about worrying about getting gay bashed. And I once again realized that I really do need to appreciate the freedoms that I have back home. So the next day, I go back to the armory, and this time it was open. Miss Vacation was there. And I tell you what, this place was worth the wait. There were all sorts of jewels, right? The favorite thing that I saw was Catherine the Great's coronation dress. And it is this fabulous dress with diamonds and rubies sewn into it. It was really cool. Really cool. But as I looked around, I realized, you know what? I'm Russian. So all this stuff is my heritage too. And as I looked around, I couldn't help but feeling a little proud. So I'm walking back to the hotel, and as I'm walking back to the hotel, this group of schoolgirls run up to me and they want to take a picture with me because they think that I'm a rapper. I continue to walk, and then I walk past the statue of Peter the Great, and as he looks down at me, I look at him and think, I wonder if we're related. Then I continue to walk, and this guy and this girl are walking, and this girl has a camera, and the guy's like, "Hello, bro." We take our picture together. Then I'm almost at the hotel. I'm standing at the corner. I'm waiting to cross the street, and this horn's honking, beep 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 beep. And I look over, and this guy's like, "Hello, bro." And I realize, okay, this place is fucking crazy. So we are now headed to St. Petersburg, and I was getting a little sad because I realized that my time here in Russia was almost over. So we packed our bags, and I went to give the very stern front desk clerk our key back, and she did something really weird. She smiled. And not only did she smile, she says, "Enjoy the rest of your stay in Raja." And I thought, I wore her down. Yes. So we went and caught a bullet train that went from Moscow to St. Petersburg. And we took what was supposed to be a 13-hour trip in 4 hours. So we get to St. Petersburg, and since my time was limited, I wanted to get as much in as possible. And so I decided that I wanted to go to another Russian gay bar. So John and I drop our bags, we hop a cab, and as we're taking the cab, we then start to remember the warning that we got from Nikolai the night before. You know, don't take a cab as a gay man because you will get in trouble. So we had the guy pull us over, and we get out, but we get out of this roundabout. And so we were a little confused because there were 3 entrances. Do we go this way? Do we go that way? Do we go that way? And so we're standing there and we're trying to figure this out. And I see this group of girls walk by. And with this group of girls is a guy wearing a pink feather boa. And I say, "John, follow them. They're going to the gay bar." And they were. So we walk into the bar and we're greeted by this bouncer who was 6'5", and he had a tattoo on his face, and he had these piercing blue eyes, and he looks at us and he yells, "Do you know what kind of bar this is?" And we looked at him and said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, girl, come on in." And we go to this gay bar, and this is where I saw my first Russian drag show. And I tell you what, this was one of the most unattractive drag shows I have ever seen. The clothes were awful. The makeup was horrible. You could see the guy's 5 o'clock shadow. It was really bad. But for this being one of the most attractive, one of the most unattractive drag shows that I've ever seen, this was one of the best drag shows I've ever seen, because I found out that these guys were literally putting their life at risk to do drag. They could have been beaten up. And like I said earlier, as a gay person, when you get beat up in Russia, nobody helps you. They could even possibly be arrested. You know why? Because it's not against the law to be gay in Russia, but it is against the law to promote homosexuality in Russia. And so these drag queens could go to jail because they could be accused of, they could be accused of promoting being gay. But what I loved is the fact that these drag queens said, fuck it. We are going to do our thing. We are going to live our art. And it took suffering for your art to a whole new level. And as I watched this show, I had mad respect for these drag queens. Mad respect. So the next day, we needed to get in as much as possible. So we hit the ground running. We're walking down the street in St. Petersburg, and I walk by this guy in a horse costume. And as we walk by him, he looks at me and says, "Hello, bro." Then we find this museum, right, called the Chocolate Santa Museum. And so I say, "Hey, John, get a picture with me next to the Chocolate Santa." And as we are taking our picture next to this Chocolate Santa, this woman comes up and asks John in Russian, "Can I take a picture with your friend because he's chocolate like the Santa?" We go to the Hermitage, and this place is amazing. It said if you look at every piece of art for 5 minutes in this thing, it would take you 6 years to get through this. So we walked around and we looked at the art. And my favorite thing there was this clock. And at the top of the hour, the clock would spit out real pearls. Really cool. So that night, we celebrated my last night in Russia. We went out to dinner and had a wonderful dinner of black caviar pasta. It was wonderful. And the next day, that was it. It was time for me to go back. Now, John had to stay in Russia because he was going on to Siberia for more business, but I was headed back to LA. And I had a layover in Moscow. So we're at the cab and we're saying our goodbyes. And I could tell that my relationship had changed with John a little bit because he says to me, "Les, I just want to let you know that you are very fun to travel with. You're independent. I don't have to babysit you. And we need to travel together more often." And so I hop in the cab. And I guess something did change in our relationship because 1 month later, we got married. And that's a whole other show. A whole other show. So I'm headed back to Los Angeles. And not only did I have to switch planes in Moscow, I had to switch airports in Moscow. So how was I going to get from one side of town to the other? The metro. So I fly to Moscow and I catch the metro and I take the metro across town. And as I'm getting out at the airport to walk up to the airport to go in, I'm walking up the stairs and I'm greeted by this woman who walks up to me, gets in my face, and sings, "Hello, darkness, my old friend." And then she whips out her cell phone and I take my last Russian selfie. Thank you. And sorry about the confusion last time. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And yeah, watch it, have fun. I did it twice tonight. I'm tired. I'm now going to eat dinner and watch The Masked Singer. And I'll see you all soon. Bye.